Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. This is another Dump the Corruption show. And the topic for this show is corporate taxes and incentives. And I'm going to check to see who's here. Andy Candy, shaking my tail feathers for your live stream because I'm ducking in. Gee, did I miss the one about Idiot Kennedy? No, that's at 8:30. Okay, I'm going to start off here. I'm going to present. I'm going to present the article called Restoring the 52% Corporate Tax Bracket Would Make America Great Again, or words to that effect. Common Dreams article. There's a picture of dear Mr. Reagan. Restoring the 52% corporate tax bracket would make America stronger. I believe that's true. This one's by Thom Hartmann. The higher wages and increased innovation that derive from a high corporate tax rate all benefit the company, the workers, and the communities where they operate, of course. They don't necessarily benefit those who own the corporation or the top executives who may own a lot of stock in the corporation. That's exactly the problem. But I think Tom is right. It's good to have high tax rates that give corporations the incentive to reinvest. Most Americans have a radically incomplete understanding of how taxes work. I kind of think that Thom Hartmann also has a misunderstanding of how taxes work, but I'm not going to get into that issue right now. As a result, changes in the tax code made by Republicans in the years since the Reagan Revolution have done real damage, both to the American economy, working class people, and to the vibrancy and viability of our towns and communities. Just like the debates around raising personal income tax rates are demagogued by rich people and their shills, there's a world of misinformation about the issue of raising corporate income taxes. Tom is quite right about that. Most of these myths promoted by the morbidly rich exploit the fact that only a tiny fraction of Americans have ever run a business or taken a business course in college, and so most Americans don't have a clue about how corporate income taxes work. They think that if you tax corporations, those corporations will both pay and then pass the tax along as higher prices. That's only rarely true because there are so many good things that corporations can do that will reduce or eliminate their taxes altogether. They also think that taxing corporate profits somehow cripples or weakens them. In fact, it does the opposite. It strengthens and expands companies because of the positive behaviors that the threat of taxation provoke. This is a very big insight into how corporate taxes do work. For example, back in the early 1970s, former President Ronald Reagan, the late before former President Ronald Reagan, the late Terry O'Connor and I owned a small herbal tea potpourri and smoking mixture company that was doing very well. We had about a dozen employees. We're buying herbs by the ton, mostly from Eastern Europe, and selling our packaged herbal products nationwide. We were making good money for a couple of guys in their early 20s. At the time, the top income tax rate for a corporation was 48%, down from 52.8% in 1969 on profits over 25,000. And as we approached year's end, we were showing what would be a profit well in excess of that. My dad, who did the bookkeeping for the small tool and die shop where he'd worked since 1957, was our business mentor and taught Terry, Louise, and me double entry bookkeeping. So we sat down with him and asked him what to do. First idea was to simply distribute the profit to ourselves as a paycheck. My dad put the kibosh on that idea because we were both already making enough that the top part of our income was being taxed at 60%, which meant almost 2/3 of every additional dollar we took would, excuse me, which meant almost 2/3 of every additional dollar we took would simply go to the federal government. We were paying ourselves about 3 times what our workers were making. And they were paid at Lansing union scale along with health insurance. Leave that money in the company, Dad advised us. You'll get your payday when you sell it and only have to pay long-term capital gains taxes. At first, we thought that was bad advice. But if we keep the money in the company, it'll have to pay 48% taxes on the profits, we objected. Well, I just give it to Uncle Sam. I remember my dad smiling at that. That's why there are tax deductions, he told us, as I recall. They've designed to incentivize particular behaviors that are good for the country and good for your business as well, unquote. Excuse me again. I do not have a cold. The particular tax deductions he suggested we use were to give our employees a raise, invest in advertising and marketing to increase our sales, and to develop a new product line. Advertising, salaries and benefits, R&D, and new product development were all fully tax deductible and still are. We took his advice and grew the company from a dozen employees to around 18. Made a pile of money selling a new ginseng product we developed with those profits to Larry Flint, and eventually cashed out when we sold the company to several of our employees in 1978. This example highlights how there are really 2 reasons for both personal and corporate taxes, and they're both based on similar rationales. The first reason, the one everybody understands, is to raise money to pay for government services that benefit us all. Taxes, as FDR often said, are, quote, the price of admission to a civil society. Now, of course, from an MMT point of view, taxes do not pay for government services. They drain money out of the economy. What pays for government services is a new money created by the Federal Reserve in the process of settlement of corporate taxes. The second, though, going on with the article, is really the most important. Taxes are used to incentivize behaviors that are good for the nation and discourage behaviors that are destructive to the nation. And these are 2 important functions of taxes, as Tom says. This is where Reaganomics has not only screwed American working people, but screwed American business, particularly small and medium-sized businesses as well. While America is still a wellspring of innovation, we could be doing so very much better. For example, just the mostly tech companies listed in the S&P 500 bought back 882 billion of their own shares in 2021 and over 1 trillion in 2022, and that's nearly 2 trillion spilling out of just one or two market but sectors. $2 trillion is 4 times the cost to eliminate all poverty in the United States. So you'd think that if America's biggest companies were spending roughly $1 trillion every year, they were doing something important with it. You'd think that maybe they were doing it because the government had provided them with some incentive, direct payments or tax advantages to do it. Sadly, you'd be wrong. That's not much the case. Not one penny of that nearly 2 trillion in 2021 and 2022 went to developing new products, promoting existing products, paying employees better, building new facilities, or supporting the communities in which they operate. Instead, virtually all that money went straight into the pockets of shareholders, senior executives, and CEOs who are compensated with stock and stock options. Before Reagan, this was a felony crime called, quote, stock manipulation, unquote. CEOs who executed share buybacks just to artificially inflate stock prices could go to prison. FDR criminalized share buybacks in the early 1930s because they're simply a form of stock price manipulation and were one of the main reasons for the stock market crash of 1929 that kicked off the Republican Great Depression, which super illustrates the point there's nothing magical, normal, or natural about national economies. They're not the result of immutable laws any more than the NFL's rules for football are. The rules of marketplaces are created by governments, and governments decide who will benefit from these rules. That's another very wise point by Thom Hartmann. And in the 1980s, Reaganomics shifted the priority of the rules of business from helping workers, communities, and the overall American economy to purely supporting the morbidly rich CEOs and trust fund babies who funded Reagan's election. Today's post-Reagan revolution personal and corporate tax situation is very intentional, including its outcomes of massive inequality, mind-boggling riches in a few hands, and widespread poverty across the land. It follows a plan that was first laid out by Reagan, later executed by House Speaker Newt Gingrich, then continued by the Republicans who followed them in both the White House and as speakers of the House of Representatives, and of course, Mitch McConnell in the Senate. None of it is accidental, and none of it follows some sort of ancient natural law. Other than demands of greed are almost always in conflict with the needs of the mass of the people and have been throughout history. In an effort to get corporate share buybacks under control, the Inflation Reduction Act finally put a tax of 1% on them. We really need to reverse Reagan's actions and recriminalize buybacks or tax them at 50% or more. So if companies want to jack up dividends and share prices, they will have to do it the old-fashioned way by having actual successes in the marketplace like before 1983. Let's read that again. We really need to reverse Reagan's actions and recriminalize buybacks or tax them at 50% or more. So if companies want to jack up dividends and share prices, they'll have to do it the old-fashioned way by having actual successes in the marketplace. There's an in-depth explainer about how share buybacks work and the damage they do both to our economy and working people that I published here a year ago last December. We won't go back and look at that now, but I will take a look at the article and perhaps we will put it into Friday's schedule if it's particularly good. Which brings us to the reason why we should go back to the 52% top corporate income tax bracket that was in place until the Reagan Revolution. There was hardly a company in America that paid that 50% tax, but that doesn't mean it was ineffective. Just like my dad advised Terry and me, companies across America avoided paying income taxes by using their surplus cash to pay their employees better, offer expanded benefits, build new products and facilities, improve their marketing, and help out the communities in which they do business. These things that derive from a high corporate tax rate all benefit the company, the workers, and the communities where they operate. They make America stronger. Expanding innovation and product lines makes the companies in the economy more vibrant. They build and strengthen the middle class. They even help the entire nation via the federal state governments because companies must show some profits as they become more successful to distribute dividends to shareholders, and those profits are taxed, producing revenue for the government. All those activities mentioned above are tax deductible, which shows how important it is to have a high corporate income tax rate because with the absurdly low tax rates, companies have little incentive to do anything other than buy back their own shares and make their already morbidly rich CEOs and major investors even richer. Former Labor Secretary Robert Reich recently published in his excellent Substack and newsletter a graphic from the St. Louis Fed showing how corporate profits have exploded over the last few decades. While Reagan set the stage, today's predatory level of corporate profits exploded because of the hundreds of holes former President George W. Bush and congressional Republicans drilled in our corporate tax code with the two massive corporate tax cuts. The Economic Growth and Tax Reconciliation Act, EGTRRA in 2001, and the Jobs and Growth Tax Relief Reconciliation Act, JGTRRA, in 2003. Former President Donald Trump doubled down in 2017 and 2020 with two new mammoth corporate tax cuts of his own, and you can see the result in the graph. Corporate profits going sky high, of course, in that graph. When you look at the graph, think of the increase in corporate profits, money after taxes that's left to distribute to stockholders and executives, as a theft from the corporations themselves. Those profits mean the companies generating them have prioritized shoveling money to their owners instead of growing their businesses or improving their products. It's a sign of how unhealthy American business has become and explains why they fight so hard to prevent unionization, which during the Eisenhower administration grew because employee pay and benefits are tax deductible. Reich noted that this explosion in corporate profits was largely the result of their monopoly power, echoing my book, The Hidden History of the Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, forward by Ralph Nader, which we're serializing right now here on the Hartman Report. But had it not been for changes in tax policies that let those profits accumulate and be distributed to the morbidly rich, who own most of America's stock, that money instead would have gone into developing new products, paying workers better, and building new facilities. As the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy noted in a recent report, the damage from the Reagan Bush and Trump corporate tax cuts is extraordinary. At least 55 of the largest corporations in America paid no federal corporate income taxes in their most recent fiscal year, despite enjoying substantial pre-tax profits in the United States. This continues a decades-long trend of corporate tax avoidance by the biggest U.S. corporations. The tax-avoiding companies represent various industries and collectively enjoyed almost $40.5 billion in U.S. pre-tax income in 2020, according to the annual financial reports. The statutory federal tax rates for corporate profits is 21%. The 55 corporations would have paid a collective total of $8.5 billion for the year had they paid that rate on their 2020 income. Instead, they received $3.5 billion in tax rebates. The examples they gave are stark. Food conglomerate Archer Daniels Midland, ADM, enjoyed a $438 million of U.S. pre-tax income last year and received a federal tax rebate of $164 million. The delivery giant FedEx zeroed out its federal income tax rate on to $1.2 billion of U.S. pre-tax income and received a rebate of $230 million. Shoe manufacturer Nike didn't pay a dime of federal income tax on almost $2.9 billion of U.S. pre-tax income last year, instead enjoying a $109 million rebate. The cable TV producer Dish Network paid no federal income taxes on $2.5 billion of U.S. income in 2020. The software company Salesforce avoided all federal income taxes on $2.6 billion of U.S. income. That's just the tip of the iceberg. It's time to punch a hole in the neoliberal lie that high tax rates hurt countries and companies. The only group that suffers from high tax rates are companies that refuse to innovate and morbidly rich CEOs who want to keep bleeding their companies dry. Taxes, after all, are an incentive for corporations to do the right thing. But in 2018, the Trump administration dropped the corporate tax rate from 38% all the way down to 21%. That Republican tax legislation destroyed much of that incentive for good behavior, which, of course, is what Trump wanted because he's never been interested in the good behavior of corporations. He always milks his corporations. If we want the vigorous, dynamic economy we had during the period from 1932 to the 1990s, we must restore the top 52% corporate tax bracket that Republican President Dwight Eisenhower championed and oversaw throughout his and JFK's presidencies, and that stayed well above 40% until Reagan went after them in 1988. It's time again to tax the rich, be they individuals or giant corporations, to restore the American middle class and return our nation to the vitality that before the Reagan Revolution was normal. It's hard to disagree with this little piece by Thom Hartmann. It's so clear that the incentive was there for people to do things for their corporations rather than pay the federal taxes. When you lowered the federal taxes that were due, the incentive was gone. They have no incentive now because the federal taxes are so low. So that is a very important thing about corporate taxes in this day, and age. And I want to now consider some comments. Hi, Steve Wolfbrandt. Andy Candy says, I don't know how you take this article, Joe. That doesn't sound like what MMT says, but I'm just learning. I'll take your word. Oh, it's part of what MMT says. If you look at a classic article, by Randy Ray from New Economic Perspectives, Randy talks about the different functions of taxation. And among those functions is to encourage good behavior on the part of those who are paying taxes in various ways. I'll see if I can't cover that article sometime in the next week for you and bring that out very clearly, because that is an important function of taxation, to encourage good behavior. One other important function of taxation, by the way, from the standpoint of MMT, is to drain money out of the private sector. And of course, draining money out of the private sector can be very important if you have an inflationary economy. So taxes are important for that reason too. taxes are important as well to discourage bad behavior. For example, high taxes on cigarettes were originally put in to discourage people, okay, from buying cigarettes. That was their function. Okay, at the time, they wanted to keep it legal, but they wanted also to discourage people from using cigarettes because they were thought to be harmful, which of course they are. So, there are different functions for taxation: draining money out of the economy, encouraging good behavior, and discouraging bad behavior. Uh, and there are two other functions I'm forgetting right now, but I'll remember them and give them to you later. Okay, any other comments? We're running a little short of time here because at 8:30 I'm scheduled to do uh, the Robert F. Kennedy. Uh, I'm going to be doing the Robert F. Kennedy stream. And he says the behavior ones I hadn't realized. Yes, the behavior ones, those are important. Let me check again, see if you got any more comments. And he says, I got that correction. So I don't see any other comments. So I'm going to get out of here and get ready for my next stream, the one about the RFK tweet. So thank you very much for coming. What time is the next? Sorry, baby yapping. Well, the next is at 8:30, so it's quick. What's up with RFK Jr.? You'll find out in just a couple of minutes. Okay, I'm going to end this stream now and go to that other one.